It's not that I don't love my job. It's just that after a week of cycling and being off, it's just, why do I continue to work? Can I
To
live in a
cycle.
commune?
I don't know. I think you're still riding high, off the compliments on your calves.
That is true.
I
I did get a lot of
Having
calf
seen your
compliments.
calves, I'm not disagreeing with any of those compliments, friend. Well deserved, but having heard that for a week continuous, I think it may have done something for you.
It's hard to come back and not hear it every day. Like, my dogs just do not give me the same level of compliments. So,
Well, for those of you who have not seen Ryan Kovar's calves, please check out his photos from his cycling ride he just completed.
yeah,
While I was
onlycalves.com. So
How many miles was it, Ryan, that you cycled down the?
532 technically. It was supposed to be 545, but they changed the route because of atmospheric rivers. So,
Interesting. And that's down the West Coast from.
Yeah, San Francisco to LA. You'll be happy to know, Audra, no tsunami signs were seen. It appears to be a low-risk tsunami area.
Can be touch and go on the Oregon coast from what I've seen.
I think that means there's some signs missing, Audra, and you should contact the authorities in that region to make them aware.
National Tsunami Authorities, NTA. It's very confusing. Some people think it has to do with transportation. Not true.
The other one. Well, welcome to Coffee Talk, folks.
Yes, we have a lot to talk about today, so let's just go ahead and run the news clip and get started.
There we go. Back to business.
All right, so we have not one, but three different vulnerabilities to get to. And the first one is the most recent. This is a Fortinet patch that was issued last week for a heap-based buffer overflow vulnerability. This is in FortiOS, FortiProxy, SSL-VPN, which could allow for unauthenticated remote code execution. And the CVE for this is CVE 2023-27997. And so Fortinet says that this may have already actually been exploited in attacks targeting government, manufacturing, and critical infrastructure organizations. And it was actually identified during a code audit following the exploitation of a different heap-based buffer overflow vulnerability, which, if you'll recall, was patched last December. So good on them for doing the code audit, but also, here's another example of a similar type of vulnerability that was found.
Yeah, and this is not the first from Fortinet. We were talking about that earlier. No blaming obvious, but that's rough.
Yeah. I checked out the CVSS database from last year, and over 100 vulnerabilities from CVEs assigned to Fortinet products. It's just been a bad year, and kudos for the code audit, and I'm glad they found it. So I think it's one of those things, like, the more companies that lean into doing code audits, the better they're going to be in the long term. And I'm kind of glad to see Fortinet doing this.
Right. I mean, there is a question about, having a lot of vulnerability attached to a product. Does that mean it's just more auditing happening compared to other products that maybe don't have as many? I don't know. That's a way to look at it potentially. But second vulnerability, this is with Barracuda. They're urging customers to replace email security gateways. This is due to a vulnerability where a patch was apparently not enough to fix the issue. So Rapid7 actually put out a blog post about this as well. This is actually Krebs on Security, an article about it, but there was also a Rapid7 blog where they actually called the pivot from a patch to replace advisory fairly stunning, is how they called it, because it would imply that the malware might be achieving persistence at a low enough level where even if you try to wipe the device, it might not eradicate any attacker access. So I'm curious, what do you make of that? Do you think that that's probably the reasoning behind the replacement instead of patching?
I think it's the most clever sales play ever. When you look at the way vendors sell products in this space.
You mean when Microsoft said the best way to defeat Hafnium was by going to Office 365?
Exactly. Right. No, it's what that would mean is think about what low level persistence would have to be achieved. So even if you do a factory reset, you blast a firmware back to zero, it's still going to be there. And that's wild. So, hug ops to all the cats out there that are dealing with Barracuda issues right now.
I mean, my question here is really, I would say Fortinet and Barracuda, there's no shame in buying any of those. I've been part of organizations that have had them, but they are lower on the, the cyber poverty line, right? Like they tend to be mid-tier. You're buying those if you're either so big, you're trying to find a deal. Once again, it's nothing against either of those products, but they're not considered, they're not the Cadillac brand. They're not the Mercedes brand of cybersecurity tools, right? If you have your choice between Proofpoint and Barracuda,
but like, what do you need to do? Block email, right? It does that. The granularity and the accuracy, that's a different argument. But yeah, I think the products, it's that tier. So how much development, secure coding, and all that goes into the back end, right?
Yeah, I can't speculate. I think I look at it of the area of if you're a consumer of those and you have to look at your threat profile and you're buying products that are supposed to secure you, but now are consistently, and they're exposed. Like the thing about both of those products is they are inherently exposed to the internet, right? They are meant to be your, if you're buying a lock to your door and the door constantly, people are like, if you just turn the handle 4 times, it just opens.
You got to jiggle it. You got to jiggle it.
All right, we got to move on because we have a lot to get to. We also want to talk about the MOVEit Transfer situation from last week. So basically with this, a number of organizations, a growing number, including the BBC, British Airways, are falling victim to cyber attacks that are leveraging a SQL injection vulnerability. And this is in the MOVEit transfer, file transfer software. The CVE for this is CVE 2023-34362. So Huntress actually was looking into this from the initial vulnerability and actually identified additional SQL vulnerabilities, which would allow for remote code execution. And then I also saw that Horizon 3 released a proof of concept exploit code for this. So there's also a CISA advisory that you're looking at here, warning that the Clop ransomware group is behind a number of these attacks and reportedly knew about this vulnerability as far back as 2021, which is interesting because this is not the first time that we've seen Clop leverage zero-day vulnerability in order to target a large number of organizations. So if you remember the Go Anywhere vulnerability, that was one. There was the Excellion file transfer appliance, a number of 0 days with that. So Clop is definitely one group to watch when it comes to leveraging new or 0-day vulnerabilities in order to just kind of like spray and pray attack as many companies as possible.
Yeah. I'm glad I was gone last week for that.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan, for leaving us hanging. Just kidding.
He's cycling away. Oh man, it's so nice outside. This is a perfect day to detach from the computer world.
I mean, it was solid. I can't complain.
It was a bad day, and then it got to be a slightly worse day for the organizations affected by this. Kudos to the threat research team, Michael Haig, and the team put out a fantastic analytic story really, really quickly, just to detect the activity from the environment. The scope of it, I think it was 2,500 servers that were connected, which seems low level, but when you look at what the applications do, it gets pretty cumbersome. To me, we talked about earlier, the big takeaway for me was this is, Audra, how many 0 days? 3, 4?
Probably 4 at this point, I think, if I'm counting correctly. It's been several that they've used. So
right, it is more than any is ungood. But now we're talking about a ransomware. I don't know, Ryan, what affiliate ransomware binary group boss that is regularly leveraging 0-day vulnerabilities in products that are widely used by. I wouldn't say a wide number, but enough to make an impact. And I think that's going to continue. What do you think?
I can't see it changing, right? Like this is just going to continue more and more. It's interesting to me because if I had to say one thing about ransomware operators historically is they've been, usefully lazy. I think it's probably the best way to put it. Like I don't have to work why work harder than I need to if I can, have my county password inspector or, we're going to talk about North Korea later, right? But like, sending a job recruiting email or things like that, like that's been a more traditional ingress rather than 0 days. So, this amount of work is kind of an interesting one to me.
I think is it a split from the because most of the access is through access brokers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say nation states don't leverage those as much as ransomware groups.
I would agree, partly, I think, because of the motivations, right? Like, if you're a ransomware operator, you want to get paid. And if you've bought a 0-day, because I don't think a lot of them are developing them, I think a lot of them are probably purchasing them on the open market.
From those nation states,
from
right?
those nation states or those nation state guys part-time, right? But if you've paid $100,000 for a 0-day, that's an asset that's depreciating every moment that you have it, if you look at it economically.
True.
Every moment you don't use that 0-day, somebody...
You drove it off the lot, baby. What's up?
Yep. So if you're buying it, like, that's part of what's interesting here. I think the report was that 0-day had been in Klopp's hands since 2021. So that's an interesting one, thinking that they either sat on it or they have been using it and no one noticed.
Mm-hmm.
It's
a long time.
Yeah, and there's no reason not to use it if they have a very easy method to exploit it, which I think Horizon 3 pushed out something pretty quickly on that.
Mm-hmm.
If they can use it, they will, and if they can use it quickly, even better. But it is, I don't want to say an escalation, but I personally haven't really seen from our deep dive on ransomware that many cases where they're using 0 days before they've been dropped, right? Like an actual 0-day. They're using the exploit after, right? Like they're jumping on top of Patch Tuesday, they're jumping on exploit Wednesday, but they're not necessarily there for...
I think there's only 2 groups that I've seen do that, and one of North Korea, ironically, we'll discuss that later, I'm sure, and Klopp are the only ones that I can think of, and that speaks to I guess their motivations. Yep. But yeah, if you haven't checked out the work by STRT, make sure you do that. Analytic stories put up, and I see that the usage of 0 days continuing by the groups that are able to afford it.
Yep. Well, we have another story. We actually have 5 news stories to get to. So here's the 4th one. I know, we got a lot today. So CISA Director Jen Easterly recently warned that China is investing in its capability to sabotage U.S. infrastructure. This is according to a report by Reuters. So these comments came during an appearance she made Monday at the Aspen Institute in Washington. And Easterly is quoted as saying, given the formidable nature of the threat from Chinese state actors, given the size of their capability, given how much resources and effort they're putting into it, it's going to be very, very difficult for us to prevent disruptions from happening. So we heard about this recently as well with the Guam situation with Chinese threat actors prepositioning, potentially exploiting vulnerabilities with SOHO routers, and then using, living off the land techniques to try to evade detection. That was a report that came out recently from Microsoft, I believe, and then a number of other alerts and advisories about that. So it's definitely, a discussion that's happening right now. What is the threat currently for prepositioning, and what could that look like in the future in case there's some sort of, escalation?
I'll say this. We haven't had a lot of chat today. If you're listening, if you want to put in, or if you have questions or say hello, feel free to. Always excited to see stuff from folks. One thing I can say, a lot of times we fangirl and fanboy on Jen Easterly here, but this, water is wet. This hasn't changed for, the concept that China has been amping up the their cyber infrastructure. She's a very smart woman with a lot of information. So I'm curious the context overall, like why she felt the need to bring this up, because it is something that I do feel like is pretty well understood. And, there's been those videos before of like the Chinese adversaries with them like panning over like an auditorium with like 1,000 people hacking all at once. And it's like, yeah, that's, when you have 1 billion people, you have a lot more opportunities, right?
Water is very wet. My favorite videos aren't the ones that you mentioned with the all the hacking. Mine are the animated ones, like the Call of Duty CGI type videos where it's just a Chinese empire and all these warships coming on, which is probably made with stolen IP. I'm not sure the complete context of it. I think it's just reinforces the idea of resilience in your strategy and your plan and your network. But calling China specifically out as a threat, the saber might rattle louder if you do it in critical infrastructure. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And we are getting some comments now. One of them is about what we were talking earlier about the Fortinet vulnerability, about, whether or not more reports means poorer product security or better research. Depends on who's doing the reporting. That's a great point.
Yeah.
And also, Ben, hello. Thanks for stopping in. So yeah,
I think you're right. I think vulnerabilities, like, it's that you will hear about it if it's a big enough product or if something happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Because sometimes it's, you know about the vulnerability because it's being actively exploited. It's not because you're being ahead of the issue and, auditing the code and looking for things.
It's not like Microsoft doesn't release hundreds of patches every week or month, right? And, it's not, Microsoft does a phenomenal job at that. They've probably one of the most mature patching processes in the world.
They've had practice.
Yeah, that's 30, 40 years, right? So,
but there is a difference, right? Like when you compare Patch Tuesday, are you all right, Mick? When you compare Patch Tuesday to like Apple, right? When Mac OS, when there's updates for that, it's more quiet. The security fixes are more quiet and you don't talk about them as much. But when you scroll through the actual what's included in those updates, they can be critical vulnerabilities. We're just not talking about them because it's not as public as a Patch Tuesday announcement. Do you agree or no?
I see your point. I don't agree, partly because historically, and once again, nothing against Apple, it's just they haven't been as critical to business enterprises. And so the reason why a lot of times those become very large for Windows is because, or Microsoft, is they are still like 90% of the corporate landscape. The other part there is a lot of times if you are able to compromise an Apple laptop, which is still based on Linux or BSD, I can't remember which one these days, operating system, there's still a lot of hurdles that you tend to have to go over.
Like there's generally exploit chains involved.
Exploit chain. That's a good way to put it. You require an exploit chain a lot more often for a Linux or Apple system. Not universally. I don't want to get destroyed here in the comments.
I mean, like in 2023, I can fairly say universally, right? Yeah. I'm pretty confident saying there's not going to be one that just pops the entire OS. Yeah. But I think Apple's always had that stance.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Mick. Go ahead.
No. I think Apple's been consistently like, look, we just roll the patches out, and you can find those details if you want to. Whereas, Microsoft has made it a point to be very open and transparent. To Ryan's point, I think because they kind of have to.
Right. And it does make me wonder, is it better or worse to be more vocal about patches because it also alerts adversaries to vulnerabilities that may not be patched right away? So what's the right approach to that? You want to make sure people patch, you want to make sure that they know the urgency of it, but you also don't want the adversary to know the urgency of it, right? Like,
I think I should just automatically patch your product for you.
No warning. Aggressive patching, right? That's what the FBI and Microsoft did for the Hafnium stuff. No, I think people also like ripping on Microsoft a lot. For the patches.
I love it.
But it's I think they do a great job on it. There is the media hype cycle there. 100% agree, Audra. Like sometimes things just really catch fire and go. Like this MOVEit is a perfect example. It was really impactful to the group of people. Like I was thinking of it the other day around the difference between SolarWinds and MOVEit. In terms of like scale of impact, and like the actual number of people who were impacted by SolarWinds long term was relatively small, but obviously that changed the world. But it was changed the world because of the novel attack vector, where this is still an RCE. So, and I love all the comments coming in here. Dario, Mark, good to see you. Franklin, wonderful. LinkedIn user, new to
see, Mark gets it. Mark just reboot it. Who's working? Take a break.
Yeah, so I guess for me, it's difficult to know. We talk about this a lot. For those who don't know, Surge, one of our roles is really to kind of look at breaking news events and determine, how much of a response we have at Splunk from an external point of view. Our threat research team is always doing great work. They're releasing detections constantly and consistently for pretty much everything.
All the things.
but we don't always as a company turn around and say we're going to dedicate 150 people to every single security issue that comes out. We literally can't. No company can. So we have to be strategic on that. So it's always interesting to kind of go through these exercises of when and where do you kind of drop everything and have an incident versus not. SolarWinds, obviously, we needed to, but it's a hard call that takes a lot of nuance sometimes, and a lot of it is driven by how much. I mean, I kind of feel like last year this MOVEit vulnerability could have come out and it would have just gone through and that was it, and on to the next thing.
Yeah, it is interesting when you see how much it's amplified and how many people are talking about it versus the impact, and it's not always, doesn't always equate to one or the other. But anyway, we got to move on, right? Because we got a lot to talk about. So got to keep the pace going.
We moved it. Now we'll move on.
Yes, we moved it. No, yeah, exactly. All right, so we definitely want to talk about CISA's new binding operational directive. This is 23-02. It was issued today. Yep, just came out. This is requiring federal agencies to secure internet exposed management interfaces. So specifically, CISA, this directive prohibits the remote management of network devices like routers, switches, firewalls, etc., over common management protocols like HTTPS or SSH, for instance. So agencies have 14 days from this directive or from when they find out about, an interface in their environment to either take the device offline or to protect the device using zero trust architecture that enforces, access control to that interface through a point that's outside of the interface itself, if that makes sense. So this is just really trying to reduce the attack surface for federal agencies.
I mean, if you are a federal agency, it's a binding operational directive. We've talked about a few of these before when they've come up. Binding operational directive is exactly like it sounds. You're going to do this. I think it's a good idea. The details are in the actual directive itself. Basically, it seems pretty simple on its face, right, Ryan? It's just, hey, don't make it accessible remotely over the common ports for RDP.
For me, what's important here, like if you're not an organization that's beholden to CISA, like why do you care? Like CISA doesn't push these things out to its constituents lightly because this is a significant amount of work. These binding operational directives, and I was looking through some of the implementation guidance, and it's devices in which the management interface is using network protocols, including but not limited to HTTPS, HTTP, FTP, SNMP, Telnet, TFTP, RDP, RLogin, Remote Shell, SSH, SMB, VNC, and X11, right? And there's a lot of stuff out there that people remote into, like thinking like SSH is fairly secure for that, and now you're taking away that ability to do remote management. And if you're a private organization saying this doesn't apply, I don't care, I don't have to deal with this, I would be saying like, why did the federal government, why did CISA suddenly come out and push this out so quickly? And there's words in there like VPN concentrators, which we have seen a significant number of adversaries utilizing VPN concentrators for years.
Well, I think to counter to Temple's advocate your argument, if I'm the analyst, back when we had real jobs, those binding operational directives, even if I wasn't in the public sector or DoD side, this is what I'm taking to management and saying, hey, this is what DHS says we're supposed to be doing. Why aren't we doing it? It doesn't apply to us. Why wouldn't it apply to us?
Yeah.
So I think it's having that in writing is super good. And to us, it seems common sense, but it's kind of enforcing that cyber vegetables thing you keep hearing me harp on about.
Yep.
Yeah.
And like the things that are in scope, right? Routers, switchers, and firewalls. It is so common to have your firewalls accessible externally for management so that people can do their job from home, right?
And here's a good point too. If someone already has access to a federal network, they're going to be searching for things like jump server, something that's labeled jump server, right? They're trying to find ways to access that management device in order to gain, lateral movement and then, even further access beyond that. And, so there are other important things too, like maybe not labeling it jump server and finding a different name, or, you know,
I like top server. That's my,
so I think when you look at it from the point of view of if someone already has that initial access, what could they do, and how would zero trust help prevent that from happening if someone already has that initial access? I think that's a good way of looking at it.
The other part here, it's not quite, they didn't quite bury the lead, but the zero trust architecture, right? What shines out of this is like, oh, by the way, if you've done the zero trust architecture that we've told you to do, that is part of the OMB memo,
You're fine.
You'll be fine, right?
If you didn't do that, you got two.
Network management interfaces are allowed to remain accessible from the internet on networks where agencies employ, zero trust capabilities to mediate all the interfaces in alignment with, OMB 2209 TIC and the CISA Zero Trust Maturity Model. So if you did your job, you can use this. There you go.
And I think the Microsoft tiered access model also kind of applies to this. It's not part of the directive, but it's worth thinking about as well. If you have the capability of separating access among administrators, or even having separate machines among administrators. So if you have a domain controller, you have only one person who's accessing that domain controller. You don't have 3 admins who are accessing it. Same for, workstations versus, other access. I just, I think it's a good idea to try to separate that if you can.
Yep.
So anyway, we have upcoming events that we want to get to. So we have, Cyberjitsu that's coming up June 24th, Cyberjitsu Con. And Mick, are you attending, or are there going to be Bluenomicon books? What can people expect?
I'm not 100% sure. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be there. There's definitely going to be books. Marcel Lee, one of the authors in Bluenomicon, she's on board for Women's Society of Cyberjitsu. It's their 10th conference, I want to say, and the 4th annual awards. So June 24th, the Mark Center in Northern Virginia. Be sure to check it out. And there'll be hundreds of books on hand. So if you don't have a copy of Bluenomicon, be sure to get one there and be part of a fantastic event.
Awesome. We also have Conf coming up July 17th through the 21st. And I went ahead and added all of the sessions that I'm aware of that feature Surge members. And Ryan, you're actually a part of a keynote, which is exciting.
Yep. I will be part of the keynote. I'll be talking about some stuff around Surge. I'll be talking around some of the projects. I'll be talking about the peak threat hunting framework, and it's exciting. I've never done a Splunk keynote conf, so I feel like I went to conf in 2013 as a customer, and now this is my 10th conf, and I will be keynoting. So that's all it takes is 10 years of diligence and 17 speaking spots. So once I've hit that, it's just you're in.
Yeah. I mean, technically, you've had plenty of speaking spots. It's just all the other speakers get hurt and you step in. It's
a real nice Splunky to you course you got there, David Bianco. It'd be a shame if something were to happen to you.
All right, should we move on now to the charity challenge?
Sure.
All right, let's roll the clip.
And now, Splunk Cybersecurity 60-second charity challenge. Remember the rules. You've got to get through an entire subject in 60 seconds, or you donate to today's charity of choice. Good luck!
All right. So Verizon recently released its annual Data Breach Investigations Report, or DBIR. DBIR? Do people say DBIR? I don't know. Is that?
They do now.
They do. DBIR report. So anyway, report came out. Looking forward to this every year. Has a lot of really great information. We were talking about it earlier with some of the things that stood out to us from this report. One of which was initial access trends, and unsurprisingly, stolen credentials play a big role in initial access. And in this report, they found that they were leveraged in nearly half of the breaches for initial access into an organization's systems. So with that, because it makes up such a large proportion of initial access vectors, we thought we'd do the charity challenge to explain top mitigations for credential theft. So who wants to go first with their recommendations for that?
Well, what's our charity?
Oh, right. I do this every time. I forget the charity. I'll let Ryan explain the
consistent.
charity
Sure.
because
The charity this time is the AIDS Life Cycle. It's what I was actually riding from San Francisco to LA to raise money for, and it's a great group of people who raise money to try to help out folks who are HIV positive or AIDS or their families, and also contribute a significant amount of money towards trying to end HIV and AIDS. So they've done some great work. It was a really inspiring ride for myself. Our former colleague David Verve and Derek King joined me. We personally raised about $17,000 for the bike ride, and then overall, the charity raised about almost $11 million this year, or over $11 million. So it's one of the single largest charity fundraising events for HIV/AIDS in the U.S., and it was a great experience, and they really put the money to good use. So in honor of Pride and my own personal adventure, which is now I'm still recovering a bit in those calves, highly recommend, and minimally Mick and I will continue to donate more money to the charity after the end of this. So
awesome. Yeah, it's a great charity.
and I will go first. I will volunteer to go first this time, Mick, so that I can just use in quickness. That's the so Ollie, feel free to roll clip. So I was on vacation last week. I wasn't able to do my traditional, the Verizon DBIR was released tweet thread yet. Don't worry, it's coming. But saying that, one of my biggest findings last year was the prevalence of credential theft. I think I said cream, credentials rule everything around me. And the use of credentials over and over and over again has continued this year. For those of you who haven't dug into it before, cred theft is the use of credentials by adversaries who gather them either dumping off of POP machines or using password dumps from breaches. In this case, Audra's talking about initial access points, so it's more the breaches. Because the credentials are legitimate, they can be really hard to detect. My number one way to find and mitigate or detect credential theft is baselining as a method to find new or weird places that the utilization of credentials were used, and also to see if a executable has actually started using that credential for the first time. If PSexec starts using a credential, why are they doing it, and why haven't you found it before? Today's the day to start hunting and try out the Peak Threat Hunting Framework from Federman and Bianco.
All right, got the peak mention in there.
There we go.
So I too was on vacation last week, and so I was thinking more about beaches than breaches, but what are you going to do? Credential theft, yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's been pretty consistent for the past couple of years, and it's nothing new. So I'm not going to say the same things like, oh, you should use a password manager, strong passwords, don't reuse passwords, stop using passwords altogether. How about that? Just like eating your cyber vegetables is good for your physical health, same thing to your cyber hygiene. Start moving away from passwords entirely and credentials entirely and move to a hardware token or passwordless authentication. Hardware token is a small device carried around with you. You can even get embedded in your hand if you want to, if you're weird like that. It's basically, you don't have a password anymore, you use a token. Passwordless authentication is something like your fingerprint or facial recognition. Now, services like Google, Facebook, Twitter, or Meta, whatever they're called now, all have these systems in place and all support tokens. So stop moving away from password systems. And I think these breaches will go down. We move to a more secure identity management system.
All right. Well, let's ask anyone watching if they have an opinion about who had the better answer between Mick and Ryan. I think those were both really great points. Passwordless is hopefully going to become more prevalent. The problem, though, is as a user, you're kind of limited to what companies are doing, right? Like, if I'm a customer or a consumer of something and I have an account, it's not really up to me if I want to go passwordless, right? I mean, you kind of
Clara just brought this up, right? Can you tell banks not to use passwords anymore, or just two-factor authentication that's not SMS based?
Yep.
You know, I remember when I worked lived in the UK, my HSBC would send me basically a one-time pad little device that I had to use to log into my account for extra security rather than anything else. So they definitely have the capability.
I will get you some identity monitoring. Okay, you'll be fine.
I have like 9 times amount of that, so it's
yes.
It's.
I will be long gone before the monitoring runs out. Yeah, Laura, I completely agree with you. I think short of some sort of identity management framework and policy that's legislated out, we're going to keep having this discussion.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, Riri says Mick gets their vote. So Should we go with that? Does anyone else have an opinion before it's too late?
I feel it's 1-2 right now. 2 Mick, 1 me.
Did you vote for yourself?
No.
Did you vote?
That would be a +3 modifier. I would just win. So,
well, with those calves,
yeah, I will crush you. Do you have an opinion, Audra? What are your thoughts?
Well, the one thing that I was curious about is the argument for.
Are you voting for yourself? Is this a
yeah? Let me tell you what I think. Is rotating passwords, right? I was surprised that wasn't something that we talked about before. Oh, look, Ryan, you just got another vote.
I said rotating passwords. I said rotating passwords is a bad idea.
I think we're tied at this point. Mick, Ryan, Mick,
you're the tiebreaker, Audra.
Oh no. Well, gosh, it's hard because Mick, I like your answer, but it's more theoretical than realistic, right?
How is a hardware token theoretical?
Okay, hardware token is not theoretical, so that's fair. Okay, I'm going to go with yours, Mick, because...
Thank you, Audra. You are the best.
Thanks for reminding me of the hardware token part, because, you know, if you had something like a YubiKey, for instance, that definitely does help, you know, with credential theft, and even more so than like 2FA, for instance.
There you go. And the question was around mitigating, not detecting.
Account takeover.
So there we go. Cool.
Ryan, donate to your own charity?
I'll just keep donating to myself. It'll be great. It's over and over.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on now to our deep dive, where we're talking about North Korea.
And now we talk about things that just happen to be on our minds with who's ever here, because we made this up before I knew who'd accept my meeting invite.
All right.
It's being so funny. It's just,
So North Korea, this is based on a Wall Street Journal exclusive that came out recently, reporting a big picture about the North Korea crypto heist. The totality of what they've been able to steal equates to about $300 billion worth of cryptocurrency that they've been able to steal using cyber attacks. So the report also found that about half of North Korea's ballistic missile program is being funded from the cryptocurrency that was taken from those heists. So pretty alarming when you think about it, right? Because so far we hear about each individual attack and how much they've been able to take from that. But to see the big picture, that it's 300 billion with a B dollars, and that's really moving forward the country's nuclear program, which is a priority when you look at the number of missile tests and whatnot that we've seen just in the last year or so. It's really ramped up. So that would be a sign that these attacks would likely continue in order to continue to fund that and continue to build that. So I'm just kind of curious, you know, Mick, obviously with your background with threat intelligence and tracking, you know, advanced persistent threats and other nations, you know, because we obviously, when we think about nation state threats, we think about Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, right? Those are the four that I would say probably get the most attention in terms of their capabilities. But, you know, I think with North Korea, it's a very unique situation where, you know, their cyber capabilities really level the playing field, right? Like, this is a country that ranks like 11th lowest GDP per capita, right? And it's an international pariah, and yet they're able to accomplish this just based on cyber. So anyway,
how bad do you feel as a country when you're like below North Korea? This hurts.
So, I'll be the dissenting voice again. If DPRK isn't on your radar as a threat analyst, you're not paying attention, or you haven't been paying attention since the Sony hack in 2014. I think North Korean actors have been financially motivated, and they've been at the big kids table. Going back, you look at the Sony hack, and then a few years after that, what was that called? WannaCry. And then the SWIFT transfers, or the attempted SWIFT transfers, where it was $81 million they made off with, but it's all attempted at $1 billion, and it would have been $1 billion, but some North Korean operator and just fat fingered it. It just they've been at the big kids table for a while, and I think it does them a disservice to think of them as anything other than that. I think for a while that may have been the case. Ryan, I don't know your background in the same, but the Taedown gang was a formidable opponent.
Well, you had your apex predators of Russia, like your A team was Russia, your B team was China, and then your C and D team were Iran and North Korea.
See,
right?
having been a China analyst, I would wildly disagree on the AB. But
listen, attribution used to be easy. If you caught them, they were China. If you found out from someone else, it was Russia. That was how it was. Now that's all.
And if you got scanned, it was
Akinetics and Habib scanner. It was Iran. And if it was a whole bunch of kids throwing rocks at your window, it was North Korean. So it's the North.
If it was a 0 day that got caught the spam filter, it was North Korea.
Okay, well, what about the 3CX supply chain attack that we most recently saw? That was
I'm not disagreeing with you, Audra. Like my question here is more for what's fascinating to me is the North Korean adversaries, when they started, at least in my experience, were a traditional nation state adversary. They were looking at espionage, they were looking at IP, they were looking at various things like that. And at some point, and I would love to be look back at this and drink the cup of gruel or whatever it is in a meeting room somewhere in North Korea that this was being discussed. But like at some point someone said, what we could do is make a lot of money off this crypto thing. And like having to explain that to people and then figuring this out, right? Like that's just a fascinating thing to me. And how did it go, like where they made that discussion? Fly on the wall for that one, right? And to me, that was the divergence, like where they were financially and economically motivated rather than, and it's not that they still don't do nation state espionage and IP theft, like that's definitely still out there. But they're like, it seems like the focus has been like, well, we can't sell tractors, but we can get Bitcoins.
But a lot of Bitcoin.
We go back to, all the way back to Sony and the compromise then. And then, Sony from then and now is a world-class program. The friends we have over there still. Sony's an incredible
Katie Brown, a proud Splunker, came over from that team.
Yeah, that's right. Katie's fantastic. And when you look at what happened there, that's kind of the example that a lot of us go back to, where ransomware operators data exfil first, and then the ransomware is launched. When something like that happened, and that was kind of the first framework for that. Yeah. So,
I want to see a timeline.
What's that?
I want to see a timeline of all of these crypto heists and the amount that was recovered from each of them, because the most recent one that was mentioned in this Wall Street Journal article was $600 million. And I believe it was the largest or one of the largest that North Korea has been able to pull off, which could indicate that they're getting more and more money each time they're doing these. And this was actually a fake job offer that led to a compromise that generated that much in cryptocurrency. And, I was really impressed with the 3CX hack. I mean, just the ability to have such a widespread supply chain attack. And then from that huge amount of victims to zero in only on cryptocurrency companies. That was essentially what happened. And to me, I was just like, whoa, I mean.
Well, that's the targeting aspect, right? Like we see that the other way. I mean, it's not super. If you look at SolarWinds, for example, like there are a lot of companies who were impacted, but not, they were impacted, but not executed after, right? Like they had the beacon. They said, okay, we caught some dolphins. We want the tuna, the very rare tuna of these 5 or 6 companies, and we don't want everyone to know all the capabilities. So, that kind of plays into Mick's point of like they're grown up, they're doing their thing. Their motivations are just different than, but, I don't follow North Korea anymore. Like my assumption is there are units within North Korea that are focused just on this. They're getting a lot of the news. And I'm sure if you are a company or a country that does business with South Korea or one of the traditional adversaries of North Korea, you're probably really shaking your head in violent disagreement at some of our statements here.
Right? You're just, you more. Yeah. I think it's really a unique perspective. And if you haven't read the article, it's a fantastic job by our friends, Bob McMillan and Dustin Valls over at Wall Street Journal. Yep. It's a pretty comprehensive look at the totality of what North Korea has been able to do in, 5 years it goes back, the money? Mm-hmm. So the billions of dollars is just in the past 5 years is this what they've stolen.
Right.
So it really has flown under the radar. And then you look at the money from there, we're using it to fund half of our missile research program, which, to be fair, not to be fair, I guess, I hope it goes horribly wrong. What are you supposed to do with that? Like,
yeah,
that's why you're stealing the money, right? It completely lines up with your priority intelligence requirements. It's, we're going to get this done, and they found a novel way to fund everything.
Yep. Well, I would just say it's just a good reminder, this article, of don't underestimate North Korea. Not that I'm saying anyone is, but just don't, because here's proof of what they've achieved and what they might continue to achieve, which is concerning, especially when it's,
Yeah, it's definitely worthwhile to take some time and think through, if you're doing a threat model and you are in the realm of what North Korea might be interested in, take a hard look at yourself.
Yep.
I think pull this thread, read the article, pull the thread, and then if you've got a few free cycles, check out the bot scenario where there were North Korean adversaries. And
I was thinking about that earlier. We started talking about this many years ago for bots, but it was 2016, I think, was our first one, and the adversary was Taedong-gong.
And look at how, because those were actual techniques. Well, hypothetically, those came from real attacks. How advanced the scenario's gotten.
Mm-hmm.
Because the capabilities, like Audra, like you're saying, North Korea's, it's not only has their finances gone up, but their technical acumen has as well.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. I also want to point out one comment we got in the chat. This is unrelated to North Korea. This goes back to our credential theft challenge about password rotation, which, I was actually just talking about at a SANS course last week about, the NIST guidelines say that you don't need to rotate your passwords as long as they're long and complex. You're set, right? As long as they meet those standards. But I think I disagree. I think if you're security minded and you care, I think it's always a good idea to rotate your passwords. And I don't know if you
disagree with NIST.
Well, I think NIST is catering to the user. They're assuming that that's too much for users. And I think that's why they're saying that. Am I wrong?
I am not going to go against NIST. I've seen that. That's like a Disney lawyer. I don't.
Drew Church is jumping his Subaru right now to drive to your house.
No, he's not. He's taking public transportation.
When it comes to credential theft, I think it depends, right? I think that there's an advantage I think that it doesn't hurt, right? It doesn't hurt. Maybe it's not the most important factor.
I don't think it hurts, but what I think it does hurt is people thinking that because they've changed their password that they have a level of security.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the, if you have a password from 10 years ago, it's probably been breached. But the problem is, there isn't good enough reporting. The passwords now, at least my opinion on this, and I don't disagree with you, Audra. I think changing your passwords is not a bad idea. But if you wait 90 days to change your password and these breaches are getting sold on a forum within 24 hours, the concept of these other mitigating circumstance or these other mitigations are perhaps better suited rather than just saying we change our password. That's a precaution, because it also adds into password fatigue and all the sort of things there.
Right. And I think the average bear changes their password like they change their Brita filter, right? When they think of it or when they get called out.
Well, here's the other thing too. When you look at session stolen, session tokens and whatnot, right? That is a huge thing that can happen. And if you, I can't remember what the name of the file is, and I'm going to be really frustrated if I can't think of it, that essentially lists all Active Directory credentials for an organization. And there's a high likelihood that those have been stolen for a number of organizations. And if that's the case, it would benefit users to frequently change at least their work logins, because that Active Directory file,
the security account manager.
It's a bunch of letters and I can't remember what it is, but it's a file that I believe there's probably a good chance that it's been stolen from organizations. And if they are able to get in there and crack some of those hashes that are simple passwords and low complexity, there's a good chance they're going to be able to use that to get into an organization. And especially for work logins. So
if I break into your house and I steal your safe, there's a chance if I can open it, I'm going to get the contents of it.
That is true. That is true.
I cannot think of this file, but I'm going to find it and I'm going to put it in the show description when I find it because it's an important file. And I learned about it last week, and that's why I'm thinking of it. So, yeah, there's other things too. Like when you look at like golden ticket or silver ticket attacks and like Kerberos and like the tickets, like the sessions that are used for those and how you could, if you don't frequently change passwords, you could potentially use something like that. So I think there is an example for why changing credentials makes sense. I just think that the guidelines don't know if that's realistic, maybe is the reasoning behind that. So anyway.
There we go. Bruno is terrified of the thunderstorm that's rolling in, so I personally have to go, and we're at 50 minutes, and we knew this would be a long one.
Get out of here.
So thank you, everyone, for joining. Next week, we're hoping to have Alex Pinto, one of the primary authors and leaders of the Verizon DBIR team. I've been out of the office for a week, so I got to go check, but we're hoping to have Alex and I for a one-on-one, which will be really fun. And then we'll be back 2 weeks after this for, well, actually, will we, or is that July 4th? I think we will be.
I don't know. There's one more, right?
Yeah,
there's one more.
So we're looking forward to it. Thank you all for joining. Thanks, Franklin and Dario. This is all a great conversation here. Mark, we always appreciate the comments. And with that, take us away, Ollie.